This one's a classic.
Welcome back to our look through the Big Bang era of MapleStory, a period of time notoriously fraught with questionable updates and system redesigns that ultimately led to the creation of the Reboot server, the single addition to the game that, one could argue, kind of saved global MapleStory. This is the second video in this Big Bang series, so if you haven't seen the first, I highly recommend watching it before this one. Unless you don't care, which is cool, that's fine. We have a lot to cover, and I don't want to waste too much time. There's some interesting stuff that happened in GMS in 2012. Before we get into it, this video is sponsored by Eidolon, the free idle MMO you can play right now on Steam. Pets have always been one of my favorite parts of any MMO, as you probably know by now. And the new Grand Tournament in Eidolon is a way to finally put my massive pet collection to use. Thousands of players competing against one another for the ultimate prize, glory in the form of a champion pet. The tournament will begin soon, so stick around and we'll talk about it more later in the video. "2012 was an interesting year for MapleStory. This year holds the record for most numbered updates so far at a massive 20 version iterations, more than we've ever seen in a single year pre-Big Bang, and more than we will ever see in a single year during this period of time. Version 105, titled Year of the Dragon, brought with it one very interesting event that I believe is very fondly remembered: the Pink Zachem Raid. Up to 40 players would be brought into a Pink Zachem Raid instance and given 20 minutes to beat it. It was possible to receive a Pink Zachem chair and Pink Zachem helmet for doing so. Again, this was before my return to the game, so I only ever heard about it, and saw the Pink Zachem helmets and wondered where the hell they possibly came from. Cool event. The third iteration of the Evolving Ring event was started as of this update with a maximum ring level of 10, lower than the last two for some reason, but the stats were still good. Apparently there was also a daily gear giveaway event where every day a player could log in to receive one random cosmetic NX item. I'm sure the pool wasn't all that amazing though. These free cosmetic events usually result in noob NX gear sets that everyone has. The Legends events continued during version 105, and the Gachapon Grand Prize was still the Super Pink Adventurer cape. Version 105 didn't have a ton of interesting stuff, but at least we began the Year of the Dragon. Its namesake would take until December to finally be fulfilled, but it's worth the wait. Now we find ourselves at another decently sized multi-part update, another one that took place over different version numbers. There were a lot of changes to the game in this version rather than just new releases, as well as a lot of fixes. First of all, the Silent Crusade quest system was revamped. Its original form only lasted a short time, and I believe this was mostly a nerf to the purchasable items and a reorganization of the quest line and NPCs. If we take a look at Genesis in version 105, for example, you can see some NPCs associated with the Silent Crusade quest line that were removed in version 106. With this redesign of the Silent Crusade questline, Arcarium was released, a very difficult boss at the time who can now be soloed by any level 200 character with ease. The Dominator Pendant was available, as well as Fragments of Distorted Time, a scroll that could only be used on the Dominator Pendant. A few mini-dungeons were added, as well as a couple hidden streets, End of Cave and Silent Stillness 1 and 2. Aaron and Evan were once again revamped. These classes received so many revamps over the years. Pretty much every skill they had was changed in this update, so I won't bother going over them. Theme dungeons were revamped, streamlining their quests and increasing XP rewards. At the time of this update, the only theme dungeons in the game were Mushroom Castle, Kerning Square, and Crease.
Crease, my beloved.
Quests that previously required party members for the bosses of these areas were changed to allow them to be soloed. A good contribution to solo story. Pet logic was slightly updated. Previously, players could complete the Kinta's Advice quest to increase the movement speed of their pet, but after this update, pets would always move at the same speed as their master. That capability was no longer locked behind a quest. Crimsonwood Keep PQ was finally made available once again. It was still in its original implementation as of this update, and the new classes that were added to the game since its release were now allowed to participate. Players were now unable to kick party members while inside a PQ. This sounds like a very minor change, possibly something not even worth mentioning, but it was actually for a pretty big meta-defining reason that this was changed. At the time, there was an issue in Romeo and Juliet PQ where players would get kicked part way through. The reason for this was to allow the party to enter the PQ with the full number of players, reach the stage where they could farm XP from the monsters, and kick anyone who they didn't want leeching. Literally what I would do in Carnival PQ back in the day. Nexon looking out for the little guys, protecting them from bullies like me. A whole bunch of meaningless filler events were held. Notable rewards include the True Legendary Hero Medal and the Legend Sweet and Tangy Earrings. We've entered an era where event rewards are no longer all that interesting. They're mostly the same pool of items with slight deviations, so from now on I'll be covering them in this manner. There are just way too many filler events that reward nothing more than power elixirs, potential scrolls, mystery mastery books, etc. The Hennesis Ruins mobs were fixed to give proper party play XP. Apparently up until now they were bugged. I had no idea. Hennesis Ruins wasn't really an extremely popular party play spot. I didn't even know they gave party play XP, unless we're also talking about like Drill Hall. Demon Slayer's Binding Darkness and Paladin's Magic Crash were nerfed to have a cooldown before they were allowed to be reapplied to enemies as of this update. Previously, a skill like Magic Crash could be used on Empress Cygnus to remove all her buffs with no cooldown time whatsoever, completely bypassing any of her debuffs including Damage Reflect and Shinsu's shield that blocks all damage. Since this capability was almost exclusively locked behind Paladins, this contributed to the Paladin rush of early 2012, late 2011. A period of time where everywhere you looked, it seemed like there were Paladins suddenly. I believe this is the first time we saw a bind skill require a cooldown beyond the cooldown of the skill itself. And this is a very important balance change. It would go on to define the bossing meta for over a decade after this. This update is another one of those updates that had one majorly impactful release and a bunch of little changes. First of all, there was an Alliance quest line, the details of which are a bit vague, but it was possible to receive Union weapons for the corresponding classes. These look pretty cool. Ellen Forest and New Leaf City / Masteria received expansions and small revamps. Ellen Forest was given its quest line, including the release of Ephinia and her ring. New Leaf City received the Alien Invasion redesign, which includes the legendary Nebulites. Version 107 was the first time we saw Nebulites in GMS. This is a system that wouldn't last forever, obviously, eventually being replaced with Flames well after the release of Reboot, though this Nebulite meta very much defines this era of the game in my mind. A quick rundown of Nebulites is as follows. They ranged from grade A to D and could be placed into gear after the equipment was socketed by the NPC bow. Low-grade nebulites could be fused together to create new ones, but in the initial implementation, fusion of nebulites was only possible with C and D grade nebulites and could only result in C or D grade nebulites. There was no upgrade path for them yet, though this would be changed in the future. These nebulites gave a variety of bonuses, usually an increase in stats or boss damage or some other useful thing. They could even give decent skills. Nebulites are a very fond memory of mine from an era of the game I wish I had appreciated a bit more as a teenager. They were altered from time to time, so we'll definitely be talking about them again at some point. Resistance classes received a rebalance. Again. Battle Mage, Wild Hunter, and Mechanic had all of their skills altered in some way, and if you can believe it, Aaron and Evan also received yet more skill changes. Nexon was still trying to figure out the direction they wanted to go with the game, which resulted in dozens of revamps often focused on newer classes, then followed by revamps of older classes in an attempt to keep them up to par. It was kind of an arms race, of which Nexon was the sole participant. There was also the update that revamped every existing party quest in the game at the time. Firstly, Mulung Dojo was updated to be more competitive, including the Hero, Mugong, and Sogong's gloves items for finishing the day as a top-ranked player. So originally, Mulung Dojo rankings were updated daily rather than weekly. Monster Carnival 1 and 2 were consolidated into one PQ that functioned with slightly different rules. After this update, players were organized randomly into teams after clicking the Monster Carnival invitation that would appear above their head twice per hour during the PQ's active hours of 8 AM to midnight. Very specific and very bizarre approach to a PQ that was previously available 24/7. I didn't even know this ever happened, and I certainly did not participate in this version of CPQ. There were even new equips added as rewards for the PQ. Spiegelman's luxury cape and Spiegelman's bow tie. They even had a set effect. Nexon would start using this time-limited approach for a lot of important content in the near future, and I don't exactly remember anybody expressing much excitement around these arbitrary time windows where certain content was available. 90% of the discussion surrounding it was just, wait, what time is it open? Anyway, Net's pyramid was changed to no longer allow solo play, requiring 4 players minimum. Believe it or not, this actually isn't the defense mode version of the PQ, just a revamp of the original design. It would be modified again in the future though. The Sea of Fog Ghost Ship PQ was slightly updated, but it doesn't seem like anything significant was changed from its initial implementation. The free market was also updated slightly. Rather than limiting a shop to only 3 players at a time, this was updated to allowing 6 players at a time maximum. Kind of a small change, but useful since this was still the era of mass FM store shopping because the auction house just didn't exist yet. This was also the update that I remember messing up my muscle memory for shopping through the FM pretty heavily. When inside a free market room, there was a new option called Change Room that took the top spot of the system settings. So if you were trying to change channels, you'd find yourself changing rooms instead. This is a convenient system, of course, but very annoying to adjust to when you have 10 billion hours played in old school MapleStory. Finally, for version 107, Mercedes, Cannoneer, Demon Slayer, and Dual Blades were restricted from being created temporarily. A relatively arbitrary list of classes, too. It makes me wonder why. I don't think it mentioned anything about it in the patch notes. Version 108 was just bug fixes. It seems to be little more than a cash shop update overall. Version 109 was the final part of the Alliance update, featuring some revamps to Cygnus Knights and skill changes for Explorers. Empress's Blessings max level was raised to 30, and the skill Noble Mind was added to the game. Empress's Blessings effects are amplified by Noble Mind, whose level was increased by doing a quest called Stained Soul. I honestly have no idea how this actually functions, since I've never done these quests. I think this system still exists in modern MapleStory as of this video, though. Explorer skills were updated, mostly damage increases across the board with a few interesting changes. Some spears were changed from slow attack speed to normal. Arcane Overdrive was added to Magicians. Priest's Holy Symbol's max level was lowered to just 20. All Magician ultimates were given an extra line of damage. And it seems as though Pirates and Thieves were left out of this skill update. They received nothing. This update was extremely noteworthy, as it was basically the point at which Warriors, one of the only classes who didn't have a movement skill at this point, were given Slipstream, a janky little flash jump for babies, which we were all very grateful to have, though I remember it being a very awkward skill. The push towards greater movement capabilities for every class was in full swing by now, and would slowly be refined over time. Ultimate Explorers were also updated. Only 5 Paradots were required to finish the quest now, down from the original 10 that were required previously. Ultimate Explorers also received an exclusive quest that would increase their HP and MP, further separating them from regular Explorers. They also received another exclusive skill corresponding to their class in the form of a summon. This skill would level up for every 15 levels on the character. Cygnus Knight skills were slightly changed, mostly increased damage and the addition of skills that Explorers received, as well as a level reduction for unlocking their 4th job skills. Previously, they were unlocked at levels 100 and 110. After this update, these skills were unlocked at levels 90 and 100. Lion King's Castle was updated to be classified as a theme dungeon. What does this mean exactly? I'm not sure. Prison Guard Annie was updated from its initial implementation, and it can now drop Lion King's weapon scrolls. These were basically 70% scrolls that state in their descriptions that they could be used on any weapon, which is kind of cool. It's nice to have a consistent source of 70% scrolls. Finally, for version 109, Net's Pyramid was updated with its defense mode, which I covered in my PQ retrospective video. And now we find ourselves in Global MapleStory's 7th anniversary. From May 10th, the day of the update, to May 23rd, roughly 2 weeks later, Legends characters were creatable once again. This is of course referring to the 3 classes who were released with the Legends update: Cannoneer, Demon Slayer, and Mercedes. At this point in time, they weren't strictly separating classes based on branch, instead opting to classify them primarily by their release update, which is an interesting but subtle distinction, and it makes sense considering how many classes were about to be released. They still had to fill out the rosters before they really figured out what they were doing. A giant cake boss would spawn every 12 hours for the entire month of May, dropping mesos, potions, and buff items. This is not a new concept, it's something we had seen before. They might have also dropped maple weapons at a low chance, but the patch notes say nothing about them doing so. So I guess this is just weird wishful thinking on my part. It seems weird to have an anniversary-themed boss who would never drop any of the big-ticket items though, right? The new Maple equipment sets for the 7th anniversary were the Barrel set and the Crimson set, which were purchasable from Inkwell. The Joybird feathers could be used to upgrade the lower level Barrel gear to the higher level Crimson gear. Both sets had a neat little effect when fully equipped, something I never actually knew about. For the most part, this is your average anniversary update overall, but these are always exciting for me. There were new medals added to the game with this update, including some staples that longtime players will probably remember. Army of One, Pickup Artist, Forever Single, Creature of the Night, some of the classic Big Bang medals. Then there was a revamp to the Nebulite system, only a couple updates after their release. Previously, Bo in NLC would handle the socket creation and fusion, but after this update, these systems were handled separately. Alien socket creators were added to every potion shop in the game that would allow players to easily add a socket to anything without having to visit Bo. Up until now, Nebulites were available from regular Gachapon, but Nexon opted to give Nebulites their own special Gachapon. This mostly catered to whales, as your average person would likely rather utilize the massive item pool of regular Gachapon to get the most value out of their money. Or maybe that's just me who feels that way. The Nebulite fusion skill was added, which functioned as a replacement for Bo's old fusion system. This new skill allowed for a chance to upgrade a Nebulite's tier, which was a new addition as of this update. Also, Mercedes Leaf Tornado was changed to be called Leap Tornado. I knew it was called Leaf Tornado at some point. Likely due to the ambiguous translation of the Korean name, seeing as how both leaf and leap are somewhat appropriate descriptors of the skill. Version 111 is an interesting update for me. For whatever reason, Nexon thought it would be fun to tease a return to old-school MapleStory, helping perpetuate the OSMS nostalgia that was beginning to pop up around this time. This was the only way to revisit some of the old maps that were removed or redesigned with the Big Bang. We are in a completely different era of the internet in the modern day, luckily, where it's easy to play semi-official versions of pre-Big Bang MapleStory through MapleStory Worlds. But that wasn't the case in 2012. We've heard you were wishing for a way to get back to the way Maple World used to be, and no reunion is complete without a trip down memory lane. Back at this time, the nostalgia for pre-Big Bang MapleStory was just beginning to take shape, and Nexon has always been exceptionally aware of this nostalgia, just so we're clear. There was a rule on the official forums banning all discussion of launching a classic server for quite a long time, so they're definitely never going to do it. Stop asking. Unless they see that the demand is backed up with consumer money after getting other developers to test the waters through a MapleStory World server. Something like, I don't know, we could give it a silly name like R-Tail. When Nexon sees that there's actually money to be made, they can pretend they always planned to make a classic server, and it's not a hastily manufactured response to real demand that has always been present that they were ignoring. Odin MS launched years before this update, sometime in 2008, and by now was totally dead in the water, with Nexon having hit the creators with a massive lawsuit, setting a precedent for any private server creators after this point. But the Odin MS story is something for another day. At this time, there existed no reasonable way to easily access old versions of MapleStory. After the Odin MS case and the Big Bang revamp, people were very frustrated by this, as Nexon had, in the players' minds, taken away a version of the game they loved in exchange for something that less and less people were enjoying as time went on. So Nexon, the ever-sensitive and definitely not tone-deaf company, thought it would be a good idea to have a throwback event, which I can't imagine went over extremely well, even if we give them the good graces to assume that their intentions were good, which they probably were. On a less tone-deaf note, this update brought a cool event called Bounty Hunter, where players would track down and kill designated monsters. The top 20 players throughout all of GMS who killed the most of these monsters would receive an exclusive medal and Maple points. There was also a world alliance between Yolande, Cradia, Mardia, and Chaos, and one of the top bounty hunters was SSJ Dabura in Mardia, who received the medal, giving the world alliance extra 2x XP and drop. 2x events were so incredibly abundant during this era, you could truly count on having that bonus pretty much every single weekend for a period of time. This was after Call of Duty started doing tons of double XP weekends, and I think Nexon took notice of how fun a system that was. This is one of the many elements of Big Bang MapleStory that I look back on fondly. The Bounty Hunter medal is yet another extremely rare medal that I couldn't even find a screenshot of online. The badge from the event, along with the quests, were also the first reveal of Jet's name, based on what I could find, since the Bounty Hunter badge had some extra bonuses for the class which were visible on the item's tooltip. Because Jet is a bounty hunter. Get it? There was also the return of the now massive number of Maple weapons and equips available for purchase by Inkwell, and that was basically the entirety of the update. Except for the permanent closure of the Maple trade system. The first part of the Renegades update was huge. First off, they released a new GMS exclusive class, Jet, and man, what a cool class. I sure would love to play it. Maybe I'll make a Challenger World video or something fun. Wait, where is it? What happened to Jet? Jet, in its initial form, was a space pirate copy of Corsair. This was very clear to everyone immediately. I don't truly understand the response to the class's release, as I wasn't around at the time, but we all know that Jet was eventually removed because it was too complicated to keep around from a game stability perspective. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's kind of the gist of it. Version 112 is when the part-time job system was added to reward mining and herbalism materials. This system wouldn't last all that long, and I don't even remember participating in it myself. It would be revamped and redesigned into more useful forms over time. The character card system, an early version of the Legion system, was also added in this update, and this was a very fun addition to a game that was becoming more inflated with classes and characters seemingly every single update. A smart way to actually incentivize playing all of those classes. The Level Up Guide, another early form of a system that's currently in the game, was also added in an attempt to organize the game's ever-increasing scale. And again, I think this is great conceptually. The navigation system, where you could double-click on a node in the world and be directed to it, was also added. There was a revamp to Neo City and Monster Park. Neo City was altered to be more like the theme dungeon design that we've seen with plenty of areas at this point, and Monster Park was made easier. Up until this point, it had been very difficult to clear solo, so this update changed the monster HP to be more reasonably soloable. Battle Square was removed. It only lasted about a year before it was closed down and the Gallant emblems became rare drops from high-level monsters. That way players could still access the recipes and items that Battle Square brought with it. This content would return in a different form before being removed entirely though. This is not the last we'll see of it. A couple miscellaneous updates. The default attack speed was increased. I don't really know what that means, like by what amount. And reactors, such as the boxes in Orbis or LPQ, were now able to be attacked using skills instead of just regular attacks. The most interesting part of this update to me personally, though, is the Thief revamp and other skill changes. Nexon was kind of targeting specific jobs for revamps at this point instead of just making massive sweeping changes to every single class at once, which I liked, but they were still doing these huge sweeping changes for everyone, quite often. But in this update, they were mostly focused on thieves. Nightlord received the following changes. Drain was removed. Shadow Partner's summoning rock requirement was removed, and copycat damage increased from 50% to 70%, which is a pretty massive change for the class. That's a huge damage output increase. Alchemist, Meso Up, Shadow Meso, and Avenger were all deleted, but Alchemic Adrenaline was added in place of Alchemist, so I don't think that was an actual impactful change. Claw Expert, Quad Star, Dark Harmony, Frailty Curse, and Sudden Raid were all added to 4th job. Ninja Ambush and Ninja Storm were both removed. This was a pretty big overhaul for Night Lords, removing some of their pre-Big Bang identity in favor of this new post-Big Bang world. For Shadowers, Meso Guard was moved to 2nd job. Flash Jump, which they were given at some point between Big Bang and now, was moved to 2nd job. Pickpocket became a toggleable skill, which was exceptionally helpful for Lionheart Castle and Drill Hall, where Meso Explosion was a huge chunk of Shadower's damage output. I was playing a Shadower in 2012, so I have a lot of first-hand experience with this. Summoning Rock requirement removed for Shadow Partner, just like Night Lords. Again, this is a skill they received post-Big Bang, whereas pre-Big Bang, Shadowers did not have Shadow Partner. Phase Dash, Midnight Carnival, and Meso Mastery were all added. God, I love these skills. I miss 2012 Shadower. Band of Thieves, Chakra, and Assaulter were all removed, marking the end of the iconic pre-Big Bang Chief Bandit skill era. Boomerang Stab received a buff, hitting 6 monsters now instead of 4, and some passives were added, including Shadower Instinct, which is the body count system that Shadowers from this era will be familiar with. Dual Blades received Phase Dash, and Owl Spirit was deleted. I actually don't know a lot about Dual Blades, but I figured I would mention that. Maybe some of you know what Owl Spirit is. They didn't really receive too many interesting changes, though. And for Nightwalker, the changes for Nightwalker were pretty much identical to what Nightlord received. I actually can't identify a single difference between the two. There were a number of other classes whose skills were adjusted slightly as well, and these seemed to mostly be nerfs to damage for Legends classes. I guess they call this Power Uncreep? What the heck? Really though, the numbers were broadly lowered, but lines were added to a good number of the nerfed skills, resulting in slight buffs for a couple of the affected classes. Renegades Part 2 was the release of yet another new class, Phantom. Do modern day players like Phantom yet? Back in the day, Phantom was pretty hyped. We're getting very close to my return to MapleStory, but I don't think I was around for this release. I had only heard of the class from friends. I think the weirdest part of this update is the release of the Renegades world. Didn't we just ally a bunch of worlds due to low population, like just a month ago? The Renegades world had the same events we've always seen from New Worlds, but at least the Renegades bandana had a new sprite this time. Again, I might be making this up, but I've been told that Phantom was very overpowered on release. I don't actually know the specifics behind this, as I couldn't find any major noteworthy nerfs in the near future for this class, none that were documented at least. I wish I had more to say about Phantom though. Go play it right now, it's really fun. Stop watching this video and make a Phantom in MapleStory. Version 113 was another bug fix patch. This updated the server select screen, but nothing else of interest. This is a prime example of inconsistent update numbers with major updates. I think the only reason this is labeled version 114 is because of version 113 just being bug fixes. Anyway, this was another part of the Renegades update, though it wasn't labeled part 3 like you might expect, which is very confusing. The big release with version 114 was the Fight for Oswan, which was content that could be done solo or in a party. I don't really know how to explain what Fight for Oswan was, partially because I don't remember the specifics too well. What I do remember is that I spent a lot of time playing it. It was basically a reverse tower defense game with 4 level tiers, 4 different modes, and the first 3 modes had 4 difficulty levels, which seems a bit needlessly complex. The primary rewards for Fight for Oswan were Conqueror and Emperor coins, which could be turned in for some stuff. Most of which is gone by now, but I believe this was the first time circulators were made available, and inner abilities worked very differently than they do nowadays. So every day during a period of 6 hours, for some reason, you could gain Honor XP, leveling up your Honor level. Circulators could randomly reset the inner abilities with better results from higher ranking circulators. All I have to really say about this content in this update is that it feels a bit unnecessarily complex. 2 million different ways to alter Oswan's difficulty, Honor XP only available for 6 hours out of the day, the complicated inner ability system with different tiers of circulators. Looking back at this, it's no wonder I don't remember any of the specifics. It's such an overtuned system. There was another new system added called Maple Bigwigs, given to the most loyal players, whatever that means, probably richest consumers. These loyal consumers would receive a chair, a medal, a 1.2 times XP coupon that would last for 30 days, and a Blessing of Greatness box that could be given to any player of the Bigwig's choice. This contained a Jumpstart character coupon, which allowed players to create specifically a level 50 dual blade, and another one of those 30-day 1.2 times XP coupons. I know I've probably said it a number of times now, but reading about this update is really making it clear to me how messy updates were during this period. There were so many specific restrictions and complex changes that ultimately resulted in very minor improvements to the game experience overall. One of the interesting changes I saw with this update was that Phantom's skill names were updated. Maurice on the forums was credited for these translations. I was unable to get my hands on game files for any version of the game that would have these pre-update skill names, but I'd be willing to bet it was only as interesting as some of the French words being translated poorly. Finally, starting on July 25th, summer events began. They rewarded a variety of items such as pink flower tube weapons, popsicle face accessories, and super summer surfboards, which I guess are different than regular summer surfboards. These are super. The time has come. Eidolon's Grand Tournament is here. The rules are simple. Tournaments take place every day, with everyone in the game competing to see who has the best pet collection. The more pets you have, the better your chances at victory. There's some skill involved, there's some luck involved, and it's exciting to watch. Upsets happen all the time. You get 3 lives, lose 3 matches, and you're out of the tournament, single elimination style. The stakes are high and the rewards are entirely cosmetic. No pay-to-win pet bonuses for placing high. Watching the final matches play out in replays is surprisingly fun. I've never been so hyped to root for my spirit reindeer pet. I even managed to make it to the silver division, but just barely. And this is just one of the many things to explore in Eidolon, as I've learned throughout my time playing. As an idle MMO, it doesn't demand as much of my time as other MMOs, and that's extremely valuable to me these days. I can read through an entire video essay script and check in on my tournament matches whenever I get a chance. Eidolon is available on both iOS and Steam, so I can hop in-game on my phone to check up on things. And whenever I'm at my computer, I can launch the game through Steam, and my account is seamlessly saved to the cloud, which is very convenient. You can play Eidolon for free on Steam and check out the new Grand Tournament using the links posted in the description and the pinned comment. Thanks again to Eidolon for sponsoring this video. Version 115, titled Mutiny, was a huge update, introducing Hilla for the first time. Along with her addition came the release of Necro weapons and the Blackheart pet. These Necro weapons were an intermediary step towards the still endgame Von Leon and Empress Cygnus gear, with no armor accompanying them at the time. It was just weapons for now. Armor for the Necro set wouldn't be added until the end of 2014. We did get the Will-o'-the-Wisp's earrings and the Stone of Eternal Life pocket item, both drops from Hilla. At this point, there were only 10 pocket items in the entire game, and the only noteworthy ones were Spiegelman's autograph, the new Stone of Eternal Life, and the Gallant battle manuals from Battle Square, which could give up to 5 weapon attack at the highest tier. No flames back then, so these were pretty bland as far as items go. You just got whatever you could get your hands on and let it sit in the slot. The Blackheart pet and its earrings could only drop from hard mode Hilla according to the patch notes. I believe it can drop from normal Hilla nowadays, being an easily accessible free pet, but not back then. The patch notes also mention a drop called the Flame Flowers of Hell. Searching for this item yields only references to the patch notes. Searching through the game files reveals nothing by that name or anything remotely similar, so I have no idea what this is supposed to be. Perhaps it's another attempt by Nexon at baiting out hackers to kill hard Hilla. If we entertain that idea, it's pretty interesting how this fake item never quite garnered any attention from the community as a whole. There are so many weird mysteries like this in MapleStory, and despite my digging through patch notes and game files, I've probably missed dozens of them by now. Beyond the release of a new boss who was pretty impactful for many years after this, Dual Blade finally saw its return. It had previously been unavailable to create for the past 5 months of the game's existence, and would only return to the character creation screen for 1 month. This was far more common at this time than it might seem, especially since MapleStory in the modern day allows creation of just about any class at just about any given time. The only real restriction is requiring a level 100 character to create a 0, which, for all I know, they might have already done away with in the modern day. It's not like reaching level 100 takes very long. Dual Blade saw another reorganization of their skills. Some were deleted, but it was mostly a reshuffling of skill locations and the addition of passives like Sidestep and Dual Wield Expert. With the deletion of a couple skills, the corresponding skill books were retired, but I believe at this time the class still required paid skill books for a few skills like Blade Fury. Even back in the day, 14 years ago, people were very unhappy with the idea of paying $36 for arbitrarily paywalled skills on a decisively overpowered class. And rightfully so. That's about $52 at today's value. Could you imagine paying that much just to access some skills? You could get like half of Chilizart's catalog for that price. The Silent Crusade was revamped once again, including the addition of the Master Monsters with their designated maps accessible through Mystic Gates. This version of Silent Crusade would stick around for a very long time, and it's something I personally remember fondly. I always really liked the Silent Crusade questline. Monster Park was once again buffed as it slowly made its way towards becoming a more farmable piece of content. Monster HP was reduced once more, and the number of monsters per stage was increased. At the end of a run, there was a chance to be teleported to the Hidden Treasure Vault, which was fun. The music used here is cute. For 60 seconds, monsters would appear in this map who could be killed for a box of greed, which contained untradeable potions, Monster Park coins, and scrolls for pendants, including the new Avarice pendant. Avarice, by the way, being a synonym for greed, which is what this pendant would later be renamed to. Avarice is a cooler word, though. In this initial form, it functioned pretty much exactly the same as it does to this day, from what I can tell. Mulung Dojo was revamped once again in this update. 3 different modes were added: normal, hard, and ranked, each with their own level restrictions and only 10 or 20 stages, which is shockingly low. They were clearly going for a very different approach at the time. The glove rewards we all know and love were already available, but had previously only lasted for a single day, since that was when Mulung Dojo rankings would update. After this update, they were given a 7-day duration. I really don't know. I've never been a huge Mulung Dojo guy. Hard mode rewards included the Panda Ornament eye accessories. These didn't really have crazy stats or anything, and they only lasted 7 days, but I've seen them around before in anvil form, and now I know this is where they come from. Temple of Time received a massive overhaul. This was the update where the quests were made available to be started and completed without returning to the 3 Doors starting map, allowing players to more smoothly progress through the area. Walking all the way back to the beginning and then walking back to the map that has the next set of monsters to kill would disproportionately increase the amount of time it took to complete this questline. This was a really good change. Joanna was added to the 3 Doors map too, serving as a potion shop where previously there was none. Training in Temple of Time was historically a little rough without a way to repot beyond going all the way back to Leafree. This is the update where the Ornate Chest was added. This is a randomly spawning NPC who holds a shop containing a few unique items such as valuable recipes and the pink bean chair that had a limited stock that would refresh every day. Nowadays, this is probably still in the game, but supremely overlooked as its value hasn't quite held up. Finally, for Temple of Time, a number of the maps had their layouts adjusted. All of them, actually. The ones that held monsters, at least. Then there were a bunch of little changes that almost don't matter, but are part of the greater ethos of the Big Bang era. Things you'll recognize, but don't immediately come to mind as important when this era is discussed. For example, Victoria Island now sells equips up to level 40, whereas they used to stop at level 30. Osiria now sells equipment between levels 45 to 70, whereas they used to stop at level 40. And the prices of these pieces of gear were all lowered as well. Scroll sellers, the ones you could find in the offshoot maps between towns, were moved to their respective towns. Meso fees were added to the teleporting rocks of Orbis and Eos Tower. You no longer had to have their teleport scrolls earned through quests, as long as you were rich enough. Fusion Jazz Bar was renovated, the Thieves' Hideout. From beta until this update, it was its original small bar with a secret toilet hole down to the Dark Lord. After this, it was given an expansion accessible through a small hole in the wall. Who are all these people? Finally, for small changes, Nebulite Gachapon machines were added to the majority of towns. Nebulites have only been available for a few months at this point, and they were still in the process of figuring out how best to implement them, while still maximizing profit, of course. Arguably, the biggest change in this already massive version 115 update was the pirate revamp. It's with a heavy heart that I report these skill changes, as this was essentially a complete overhaul of the design for both Buccaneers and Corsairs. No more Super Transform and Barrage for Buck, no more Battleship for Sayer. It's a sad day for pre-mutiny pirate fans. Flash Fist was removed, Backspin Blow, Double Uppercut, Oak Barrel, all removed. Octo Punch was added to replace Barrage, and I don't like this skill, I never have. Barrage, Energy Orb, Super Transformation, Demolition, and Snatch were all removed. This was the death of the Buccaneer class that I loved, a sentiment that we will likely be experiencing again before this series is over. On the bright side, Corsair changes were mostly good. Yes, they lost Battleship and that sucks. The golden era of version 99's no cooldown Battleship comes to an end, and Corsair is redesigned to be actually very close to what it is in the modern day. Infinity Blast allowed them unlimited bullet use. Rapid Fire was buffed and made into their new primary attacking skill for bosses. Blunderbuster was added, which is a mobbing skill that hits 6 enemies. It was overall pretty good for Corsairs, but they did lose Flamethrower and Ice Splitter. Really, this overhaul is the first time that I personally feel as though Nexon was essentially just redesigning a class. The feel of most classes at this point was ever changing as overhauls became exceedingly more commonplace, but this one really stood out to me. Probably because Buccaneer as a class has always been one of my top favorite picks, specifically because of their unique and weird playstyle with Super Transform and Barrage and Dragon Strike and everything. It was outlandish in a way that I feel was flattened by the Mutiny update. Overall, the Mutiny was a fucking huge update, and it's one I'm relieved to finally be done writing about. Version 116 was more bug fixes, too much to cover, and nothing all that interesting. Version 117 was called New Dawn, and unlike the Mutiny update, was quite small. Mihail was released, a class I have a lot of history with, a class that is in no small part directly responsible for my channel's existence to begin with. There were accompanying events that rewarded the various Mihail release equipment, including the Knight of Light chair and ring, as well as the Luminous Edge sword, which is a sword I still have an anvil of on my Mihail and Bera. One of the interesting things Mihail brought with it was its flash jump. At this point, pretty much everyone had access to movement abilities in some form. Magicians had their teleports, and everyone else had some kind of flash jump or dash, even if it was janky. And from what I can tell, Mihail was the only warrior who had such a good flash jump, as most warriors were still restricted to slipstream or some kind of dash, which is flash jump for babies. Overall, though, I think Nexon wanted Mihail to carry this update, as there was not much else to it. Events, of course, but those are admittedly not very interesting most of the time. The problem is, Mihail was not received well, to say the least. By this point, as we discussed briefly with the Maple class reunion update a few patches ago, people were starting to become jaded with this era of MapleStory. The novelty of the Big Bang update had fully run its course, and it was no longer propping up the game in the way Nexon wanted it to. Phantom was divisive. The ability to steal skills from explorers didn't sit right with some players, and people were really starting to pine for the days of pre-Big Bang MapleStory. Jet was barely even considered a class by most people. After they called it a clone of Corsair, it was very quickly forgotten. So by the time Mihail was released, people were outright clowning the new class. Nobody seemed to want it. People didn't even know what it was. Since Mihail could reach level 200, unlike every other Cygnus Knight at the time, they were confused as to its existence in the first place. It broke the rules in a way we hadn't seen before. Pair this with Nexon's tendency to make new classes overpowered, and people just weren't happy. They wanted new content, not a new class who only seemed to exist in order to sit adjacent to the offshoot Cygnus Knights we knew and loved. Mihail would quickly be forgotten, similarly to Jet, and I still believe Nexon always wanted to create more Cygnus Knight instructor classes. I wish we lived in that timeline instead. I really want an Irina class. Version 118, titled Champions, finally brought back the battle square. This new version was only open for 12 hours a day for whatever reason, and was designed differently. Everyone started at medium difficulty and would move up to advanced and superior ranks with high win rates. There was no time limit on battlefields, it was just a drop in and fight until you want to stop type of gameplay, so I don't actually know how someone would win in that scenario. There was no time limit, gallant emblems were the primary reward, and the level 130 bloody equipment was replaced with the new grand equipment. Similar stat requirements, similar crafting method, higher stats. On a far more impactful note, bonus potentials were added in this update, and they were available in all 4 tiers: rare, epic, unique, and legendary. This system would be altered slightly over time, but this extremely pay-to-win mechanic was now permanently part of the game, and without a reboot server where bonus potentials were excluded, everyone was exposed to it. There were more class revamps because Nexon can't go more than a few updates without heavily altering every class. Warriors received damage increases overall, and notably power stance was increased from a 95% success rate to a full 100% success rate. At the time, power stance was still a relatively exclusive mechanic meant for mostly warriors. However, since Mihail's release in the last update, where he brought with him Guardian of Light, a link skill with 50% uptime that gave 100% stance, I guess Nexon figured it was time to give warriors full passive stance. That's my game theory, at least. Rage was buffed to finally be stackable with other weapon attack buffs. Yes, it took them this long to give fighters a useful buff. Heroes otherwise received a reorganization of their attacking skills, giving them Raging Blow as their new 4th job attacking skill, which is pretty cool considering they still have this skill today. There were more buffs for magicians, including lowering their ultimate cooldowns from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. Archers got some cool buffs, like Marksman receiving 3 extra lines on Piercing Arrow with no % damage nerf accompanying it. Oh, how about Ultimate Strafe getting an extra 2 lines and a higher damage multiplier? Nexon really loved archers in 2012. Some more of those too small to matter but important to mention changes. Gachapon was revamped. Old Gachapon was replaced with Gacha Piero, and the item pools were standardized across all locations. That annoying Power Gacha quest was added too, promising higher rates for good items. We don't really have much proof of this though. Gallant emblems with the return of the battle square were removed from monster drop pools, putting an end to the era of the PvE farmable gallant emblems, which I never personally got to participate in. The monster HP bar was updated to show damage dealt as a red bar illustrating the difference between the monster's health before and after the attack. Storage slots were doubled from 48 to 96. Orbis Tower was destroyed by the Black Mage and was just never repaired. Not sure why, it was barely 3 updates ago that they added the Meso fee to teleport between the floors. They really need to repair it already. You'll never guess what version 119 was. More bug fixes. Honestly, I thought we were done with this complete version number bug fix thing, but I guess it stuck around for a lot longer than I thought. Version 120 is fascinating. There were a few relatively standard things, such as the Halloween events and random beauty coupons event, an event I personally love where the coupons would drop from monsters and allow you to change the entire look of your character in one click. This resulted in a lot of ugly characters with just random hair and face, which I always found very funny. When the beauty salon was added later, this event actually became very useful for getting your hands on hair and face styles that were no longer accessible. The wedding hall was revamped. This basically changed the in-game wedding system to what we have today from its complex pre-Big Bang Amoria system. And that's all well and good, but this update is awesome because of the absolutely fucking insane event Nexon tried to push. The presidential election events. The idea was to choose a side, Republican or Democrat, and get a bunch of rewards. I don't know if these rewards were contingent upon one side winning or losing. I didn't participate. Players would get supporter medals, elephant and donkey balloons and chairs, and campaigners badges. The idea of this event is so wild to me nowadays, as I'm sure it is for you as well. I wasn't playing much at the time, but I remember hearing about this through friends. Even back in 2012, I remember thinking this was an insane thing to do, but I guess Nexon was trying to appeal to their Western audience a bit more. I don't even know what more to say about this. I don't have to explain to you why this is insane. I'm sure you get it. Version 121, titled Rise Against, brought the release of Chaos Pink Bean, one of many in a series of higher boss difficulties for the ever-increasing power level of your average Mapler. With Chaos Pink Bean came the addition of Loveless equipment, its primary and, from what I can tell, most valuable drop. To my surprise, these Loveless weapons were actually best in slot at the time, beating out Cygnus gear in terms of raw attack. Coupled with the new Chaos Pink Bean eye accessory for its two-set effect of plus 10 weapon and magic attack, this was a combination of gear that finally beat out what had been meta since version 99. The only loss incurred from breaking the 7-set effect of the Empress gear was 10 less weapon attack exactly, which was obviously compensated for by the new Chaos Pink Bean set effect. So the net change was an overall increase in attack power from the slightly higher attack Loveless weapons. VIP weapons were also considered very good at the time, often a contender for best in slot weapon for the classes that actually had one. Mercedes did not, and dual bowguns are one of the coolest weapon types in the game. So I'm basically saying that VIP weapons suck because they didn't give Mercedes one. And it's important to mention that the black bean mark was not added with this update. That accessory wouldn't be added to the game until version 157, which we'll reach eventually. Suffice it to say, Chaos Pink Bean was a nice added challenge to the ever-changing world of MapleStory in 2012. It wouldn't be very long before people were clearing it, and the Loveless weapons became widely accessible to the masses. Genuinely, I never had any idea that Loveless weapons were at one time best in slot. I always thought they were just some kind of weird, renamed timeless weapons set. Version 121 is the update that removed Ninja Castle, replacing it with Sakura Castle. Classified as a theme dungeon, which is something Nexon was starting to do quite frequently at this point, its ultimate challenge was the Gigatoad, and the rewards were the Musashi hat and Cherry Moon Samurai medal. The cash shop was overhauled in this version as well, and this is the version of the cash shop that you probably remember. This is extremely nostalgic to see. This layout stuck around for the rest of the Big Bang era, and it really brings me back. Battle Square received yet another new game mode called Gladiator, and with it came 2 new titles, one of which gave 5% IED, which would have been very good at the time. Nexon put a lot of time and energy into Battle Square. And to be completely honest with you, I don't know off the top of my head why it never really worked out, but that's a discussion for a different day. I'll figure it out and I'll let you know. But it's not a Big Bang era MapleStory update without a few class revamps: Battle Mage, Mechanic, and Wild Hunter. Again. These came with Resistance revamp events rewarding the 2012 Resistance Ring, the Resistance Staff, Crossbow, and Gun, Resistance Earrings, and a coupon for a free level 30 Battle Mage, Mechanic, or Wild Hunter. Like you're on DoorDash ordering McDonald's and you get a free 10-piece nugget. I don't know, I always thought these coupons for free characters were weird. The highlights of the revamp are as follows. For Battle Mage, most of their skills were given less end lag, higher damage, and more lines. Dark Genesis's cooldown was lowered to 20 seconds on par with Explorer Magicians, and bonus IED for some of their attacking skills was removed. That one's not a buff, but it's worth mentioning. For Mechanic, their dash was buffed and they received the ability to change the color of their mech for the first time. Otherwise, it was buffs across the board and the addition of Double Down and Fourth Job. A lot of their clunky, high-end lag skills were made snappier, which is very good. I always felt like Mechanic got a bad rap because of their notoriously slow skills. This stigma was far from alleviated with this update, but it's nice to see them get buffed instead of nerfed for once. Wild Hunter's changes are weird. Jaguar Oshi was removed, the skill where your Jaguar would suck up an enemy and spit them out. I had completely forgotten about this skill. For those of you who might not be familiar, Wild Hunters capture Jaguars to use as their mounts, which allows them access to almost all of their skills. Capturing of a Jaguar can be done at a hidden map accessible via the job instructor, and there are some rare Jaguars that give extra buffs. In version 121, the Snow White Jaguar was added. This Jaguar respawned every 60 hours and was limited to only 20 characters every 3 days. The reason behind this restriction, which is extremely restrictive, was probably due to its 50% power stance buff, I suppose. I can't imagine it was very fun to sit around waiting for such a powerful Jaguar to catch. God, I don't even play Wild Hunter, and I'm very grateful that they eventually changed this. The other noteworthy change for Wild Hunters was the addition of Call of the Wild. This is another skill players will probably be very familiar with, as it's still in the game to this day, and it gives an exceptionally powerful plus 10% attack power. A percentage increase for one of the most powerful stats in the game that scales forever. This skill is so useful that people will very commonly run mules just to have access to it for bossing, and it's neat to see it being added as early as version 121. Finally, winding down on the massive Rise Against update, Hilla received difficulty nerfs as the fight was deemed too tough for players. Specifically, the altar that is summoned in hard mode to incapacitate players had its HP cut by 40%. It didn't really matter for soloing though, unless you had some way to deal crazy damage to the altar while being completely unable to move or attack. Then there were a few events. The Meso Ranger event brought Meso Ranger gear and the Meso Ranger android. The Thanksgiving event was started with its usual turkey pet reward you might remember from its pre-Big Bang appearances. In my mind, I had thought Nexon had already done away with events like this by now, so it's nice to see one of my childhood favorites stuck around longer than I had thought. Finally, the Red Leaf High event returned, which brought with it best-in-slot totems. I haven't talked about this event yet, so you're not crazy. This event was actually started in version 115, but that update was so massive I decided to push discussion of it here. The Red Leaf High event was a series of boss fights that ultimately unlocked the best-in-slot totems. This is actually a type of event Nexon has done many times before. Just look at pre-Big Bang's Agent events with its gauntlet of bosses. This time though, the totem rewards were exceptionally highly sought after. Additional entries into Red Leaf High cost 400 NX apiece, and since there weren't many totems in the game at this point, I would be willing to bet this event brought in a lot of money. I remember wanting to pay for it myself, but could not justify the cost. We would see this type of event recycled at least a few more times in various forms with various overpowered items, and there's one instance of it that veteran players are probably looking forward to hearing about. We'll have to wait to talk about that though. Version 122 was just bug fixes, including nerfs to the Campaigners badges. I guess they thought 3 all stat was just horrendously overpowered. Bringing 2012 to a close, we enter one of the largest series of updates in the Big Bang era, the Tempest update. This update was split into 5 different parts, which gives me a nice mental break from having to write 200 billion paragraphs about 1 million things in one single update. The first part, titled Into the Storm, brought many changes to the game, overhauling systems that had been in place for almost a decade at this point. Secondary stat requirements were removed almost universally. Nexon had realized, probably many years prior, that people were always optimizing to minimize secondary stats. Add to this meta things like loveless weapons, which already didn't require secondary stats and were best in slot, and it really seems like this change had been in the works for a while. Job advancement levels were adjusted. Third job now only requires level 60, and fourth job only requires level 100. This change might look weird and arbitrary, but it makes a lot of sense in practice, as the level ranges of 60 to 70 and 100 to 120 were historically often referred to as hell level ranges, where there were no new exciting skills or jumps in power to be had, just a long, slow grind until you reached fourth job. Along with this level requirement change, the amount of XP required to level was reduced for the levels immediately following the job advancement, roughly the same level ranges I just described as hell levels. This was likely to help ease the transition and give players access to their new skills more quickly. Aswan's time restriction was finally removed, and I'm still not sure why it was even there to begin with. The complicated circulator system was partially simplified, but was still kind of unnecessarily complex with multiple tiers of circulators for some reason. And finally, for Into the Storm, the FM was revamped once again, this time adding the big, dumb TV that I never liked very much. The FM was, at this time, quickly becoming little more than a haven for bots to hawk their wares and people to mindlessly shop. I don't want to sound overly negative, but the FM we know and love was already in the ground by this point. The next part of the Tempest update, titled Luminous, came just a week later. You'll never guess what they added with this one. This is where the Big Bang update becomes more recognizable in my mind. I was playing on and off by now, and there's a now lost video of 17-year-old Togain playing Luminous with commentary. I was excited for the class, but was so out of touch with the game at this point, I don't think I got very far with that character. Luminous's release brought the usual new class events, including the Luminous ring item and probably a few others that I'm forgetting. It was Christmas time though, and this meant Happyville's return and Christmas events. Notable Christmas events too. You ever heard of enjoyable and lucky winter buffs? These were actually added to the files in version 93. And were available to acquire once again with Tempest's Christmas events. No time limit, no restrictions, just raw drop rate increasing items that are probably still around today in massive quantities. Tempest events began with the Luminous update, most notably featuring a coin shop with the usual event fare and a few interesting items. There were now Mystery Mastery books available for specific classes, which I had completely forgotten about. Are you playing Nightlord? Alright, then just buy a Nightlord Mystery Mastery book and you have a better chance at rolling a valuable skill from the Nightlord pool, which I think is neat. There were also Tempest weapons, level 100 weapons for every category that came with hidden potential. Then you had the Tempest armor and accessories and the more powerful regular weapons. It was a lot. There were even a few Maple items and old event items for sale. These shops were always one of the best parts of these events, and I think Nexon learned this pretty quickly. We still have many event coin shops in MapleStory to this day. The final update of 2012, the third part of the Tempest update, brought one of the best classes into the game, Kaiser, and I won't hear any objections. The entire Heliceum region was added with this new class, including the new boss Magnus in normal and hard modes. And this was the update where Nexon announced the fake event known as the Smashing Magnus event, where the first team to defeat Hard Magnus in each world would be given the medal called One Who Spearheaded Magnus's Defeat. Turns out, this medal never existed, and it only served to incentivize hackers to self-report by killing Hard Magnus, a boss who was mathematically unkillable at this time. This is, of course, a neat way to trick bad actors into self-reporting. But Nexon's ultimate implementation of this hacker trap was heavily flawed. Even though players were reported through this trap, they were not caught very quickly, and for whatever reason, Nexon actually gave Hard Magnus a drop pool, which meant the rare, impossible to obtain drops flooded the economy since hackers were not immediately banned and were still capable of receiving the rewards. You would think they'd at least add the safeguard of not giving the unkillable boss the most valuable drops in the game if they knew hackers were going to be the only ones killing him. Cool in theory, butchered in execution. On the bright side, Magnus brought one of the coolest items into the game, the Kaiserium. This was an extremely rare drop from Hard Magnus. I've personally killed that boss hundreds of times and only received 2 ever, I think. Finding one unlocked a questline that required killing Hard Magnus 7 times to turn it from cursed to liberated, unlocking its ability to be upgraded and making it one of the best swords in the game. I've yet to acquire a liberated Kaiserium, it's one of my life goals, but I always loved this mythical item. The Nova and Tyrant gear, the same gear that flooded the market due to hackers being rewarded for hacking, was also added with Magnus, and this would quickly go on to define the new meta of the game for the foreseeable future. It was very good, and would have a fancy superior Star Force system. Every star added to a superior piece of gear would give much higher stat increases than regular equipment. This would be slightly altered in the future when the more modern Star Force system is implemented, but this is how it worked back in the day. Then we have hyper skills, and I'll admit I don't fully understand hyper skills at this time. From what I can tell, hyper skills at this point were not present on all classes. This early system of hyper skills is very mysterious to me. I never got anywhere near the level required to access them. But with this update, hyper skills were added for Aaron, Evan, Mercedes, Phantom, Luminous, and Kaiser. At this time, hyper skills also still had stat-enhancing passives that all classes had access to. This one-size-fits-all approach is very traditionally Big Bang homogenization, but it was actually pretty cool and kind of worked, but would later be converted into the hyperstat system we know today. This was also the update that introduced those hero feathers that are nowadays primarily used as anvils. This was a part of the 5 Heroes event, where players were rewarded for reaching level milestones on newly created hero branch characters. It was the final reward given at level 70. And for the record, getting to level 70 by now was downright easy. Another event I found interesting was the Treasure Island event, mostly due to the unique reward of what was effectively a PQ bonus stage, where you were allowed 60 seconds to break as many boxes as possible for various rewards. I would have loved this event, honestly, if I had participated. Some of the rewards were useful, like reverse and necro gear, but no best-in-slot equipment could be found from these boxes. And aside from a few other less noteworthy events, that was all for the Kaiser release update. And that wraps up MapleStory's 2012 updates. It's honestly a bit unfortunate to end this video here, right in the middle of the Tempest updates, considering the massive releases that are soon to occur, but them's the rules. Things would start becoming a bit more recognizable in 2013, and my nostalgia for that year is very potent. I'll see y'all in part 3, where we discuss it.